because we all know when it comes to the decisions of the past 3 years, every poll has shown us for more than 18 months, in fact, since the end of The Voice, when he turned 60-40 yes into 60-40 no, Australians have not been listening. So the Prime Minister is trying to get your attention with your money.
A $7.2 billion announcement today.
$5 million.
$10 million. $200 million. $3 billion. $350 million. $2 billion.
$37 million.
$842 million. $2.4 billion.
$8.5 billion.
$4.8 billion. $1 billion.
See? It's just endless, literally every single day. And we are, what, about halfway through March? Not even at the end of the third month, and that is just the daily toll on the billions and billions and billions. Well, despite the fact that Jacinta Allen is running a very unpopular government, she, of course, was around the table when Victoria was spending money like, well, even drunken sailors would have been embarrassed by how much money was going around. And in actual fact, so unpopular is Jacinta Allen that I know this to be a fact, that Anthony Albanese has come in and out of Melbourne, slid in and out of Melbourne without even telling the Premier he's there, let alone stopping over for a lunch or doing a selfie by the barbecue like he did with Dictator Dan. They are not going to be seen, apparently, arm in arm at the upcoming election. Why? Because Victoria is one of the worst performing states at the moment in terms of the primary vote and the latest polls in and around this upcoming election. Now, they are down 8 points since the last election. They were there in the very early 30s. They're now down to the mid-20s. New South Wales and Victoria, the worst states where the most number of seats are. So this is a problem. When not even you can crack a quarter of the vote, ever so slightly to the technical quarter in Queensland. And as we saw out of Western Australia, Labor's probably doing better in Western Australia, South Australia and Tasmania. I don't know what's happening in the Northern Territory, but we will all find out together in just a few weeks' time. But desperately trying to find a way not to embrace the bad Victorian government, who has done disgraceful things to its economy, blown every version of the credit card, and now they are onto the payday lender as a way of being able to keep the lights on in Victoria. Well, now the entire pot of GST money has been rearranged. Money will now be going to Victoria. Victoria will actually be getting more money or a greater share of GST, the tax of 10% on everything, paid, of course, from the southern bit of Tasmania, the top of Queensland, over to everywhere in WA and everywhere else in between. Victoria has emerged as the biggest winner of this next year's GST carve-out. Of course, nothing to do with 24% in the opinion polls. Oh, this was all scientific, apparently. They're going to get an extra $3.7 billion in revenue. The Commonwealth Grants Commission made the decision on Friday. It shows that Victoria is expected to get $26.1 billion in GST of the total $95 billion that the tax creates. By the way, that is less money than company tax and less money than personal income tax. So just in case you think the biggest source of government revenue is the GST, no, it's not. It's you going to work. So good luck paying tax until Wednesday. The huge increase to the state coffers is up from $22.5 billion in 24-25, rolling back to $18 and a bit billion in 23-24. Victoria's got 25.7% of the nation's population, but will get 27.5% of the GST. This means when you actually put some numbers together, and I'm saving the GST announcement because that comes from a different pot of money, the total amount of promises to buy your vote from a Prime Minister who is in a world of trouble, no matter how many times you hear about the protection racket coming from his mates in the media that he likes to metaphorically tuck into bed each and every night, almost $40 billion. And as you know, one of the reasons why the government has been able to post surpluses for the past couple of years, and probably again in a couple of weeks' time, is because the huge receipts when it comes to mining, huge increases when it comes to the taxes on things like petrol and cigarettes and alcohol, huge increases in the amount of money that is coming in when it comes to personal income tax. And largely all of this extra money has resulted in an extra $400 billion coming to the federal government. But as they write in the Financial Review, much of it has been wasted. It's been wasted, put simply, as Chris Richardson, who we hope to talk to between now and the budget, by the way. He's, of course, the guy who has a look at the budget. He's able to work out what is the on-budget money, the off-budget money, the money they promised to save and the money that they are overspending. They were kissed on the proverbial, given a blank cheque, $400 billion. What do they spend it on? Generally, welfare, guaranteed pay rises for public servants, 3 pay rises for politicians. How did your life get better as a result of that $400 billion? Oh, and by the way, one of the ways they got that $400 billion is they took $1,500 off 10 million taxpayers. Remember this. Whatever they have promised, whatever they promised to deliver, for 10 million workers, $1,500 worse off after one of their first budgets, and you have never got even close to that number. Again, more polls as we are talking tonight about state of the race. But let's have a look about state of the race, which I'm very excited. You know how I get into the detail and the granular. This is a great night. This is one for the hardcores. And that's why we reward you with this insight, that honestly, you'll see this stuff pop up in a couple of days' time somewhere else. Hear it first, learn it all together. Of course, the Prime Minister thinks that, if he just keeps pretending that Peter Dutton is Aussie Trump, if he can try to change the subject to Medicare, and if he can try to pose that he plays any role in a storm, then somehow his numbers will bounce back. Well, depending on the poll, there are some indications that maybe either they've hit the bottom or they're starting to move back to being competitive. In fact, in the Roy Morgan poll, now this bounces around. Like each week it shows Libs slightly in front, Labor slightly in front. It shows this week that Labor is slightly in front. A little better poll is the YouGov poll. That shows that Labor is now up 51-49, in part because of the personal standing of Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton, who've essentially now started to meet in the middle rather than one being able to best the other. Again, if you have a look at where they have put things, now remember, that poll that I showed you before, the Resolve poll, showed that Labor's vote is, 5 points down? According to this, it's only a couple of points down. The Coalition's vote, well, it's supposed to be almost up to 40. In this, it's just in the high 30s. The Greens, they end up sitting there at about, what have they got at, about 14%? What's really important for the Coalition when you are doing the numbers in your head here is have a look at the Pauline Hanson number. That's 7%. You've got to hope that most of those preferences go back to the Libs. Otherwise, if they spray anywhere else, it's definitely going to be a Labor government. As for the independents and the Trumpers or the trumpeter of patriots, they're at 1%. Meaning two-party preferred 51-49. Why? Because they say Labor has not slid as far as every other poll. They say the Coalition hasn't grown as far as every other poll. We will talk about it in moments' time with Kos Samaras, who does his own poll, speaks to people in those swing electorates. Which one does he think is closer to the mark? Also, the wonderful Michael Kroger on how to achieve the result you are trying to do. One thing that the poll also shows very clearly, and I've talked about this before, the majority of Australians do not share the view that I have and maybe you have when it comes to Donald Trump. They wouldn't have voted for him. That's what the polls told us in November of last year in terms of Australia, and only about 30% are all in on the great man. So there's going to be a lot more politics played between now and the election, and particularly this sort of Aussie Trump stuff in and around Dutton. But on the question of Vladimir Zelensky and Ukraine, which way do people go? Do people want to back in the Zelensky version, which is fight, 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 or the Trump version, which is peace, peace, peace? Well, 69% of Australians stand with the idea of fight, fight, fight. Only 31% like the position when it comes to Trump. Labor voters, the least impressed with Trump, with just 20%. Pauline Hanson voters, 57% pro-Trump. Coalition, 36%. Other voters, those independents at 30% and at 29%. Greens voters are apparently more into Trump than Labor voters. In fact, the bloke who put the poll together says Anthony Albanese's personal satisfaction levels have notably improved, particularly as Australians overwhelmingly back his commitment to stand with Ukraine. Overseas leaders who've opposed Trump policies have seen improvements in their polling results, and Trump's recent 25% tariff decision presents an opportunity for Albanese to further improve his leadership standing. Again, we will discuss all of this in a moment or two's time. A new poll that has broken just as we were going to air. Great work by Lucy and the team, who are talking here not about the Roy Morgan poll, but about the latest poll that has just dropped in the Financial Review. That one again, shows slight improvement for the Labor Party, but it's still worth noting here. On two-party preferred, they say that Labor gets 71 seats, the Coalition gets 66 seats, as you can see. The dip and then starting to come back up. The Coalition would win 9 seats in the next election. The Labor Party would lose just 7. As I've said, if they lose 70 seats, they can still get there when it comes to being the minority, I think. But clearly, if Labor has more seats than the Coalition, then obviously they're not just in the box seat, they will form the next government. But that's what they believe to be the case. They think at least a couple of the sitting independents, perhaps a couple of those Nats that might come back in towards the Coalition, or maybe a Teal or two might end up being there. So, worth noting when it comes to that poll. As for the issues that have just been dropped in that Financial Review poll, guess what the number one is? Will it surprise you? 71% of people say cost of living. So the Prime Minister tries to change it to health. It hasn't moved. Housing, the number 2 issue. Now remember, housing works in multiple ways. It's about the people who are renting, the people who are owning, the people who are paying off a house, the people who want something for their kids or grandkids. Crime is on top of the economy right now by 1 point. Climate change way out of the 5. Defence, immigration, employment are all starting to taper off, and believe it or not, industrial issues, bottom of that pile. But top of the list, still, as they used to say, what, number 1 with a bullet? Remains cost of living for the, however many, 100th week in a row. But just back to this scenario here, where these polls tell us what they have told us about the message to the Prime Minister of trying to turn Peter Dutton into the Australian version of Donald Trump. Now, we know he is not. In fact, there will be plenty of people you will read here in the next few days that are going to say he's not Trumpy enough, but the reality is anyone to the right of the Greens is going to consider themselves to be, Trumpian, certainly when it comes to the Teals. So get ready for this to be the lazy tag that they are going to put on Peter Dutton. And as they try to move the subject from their own performance, remember, they promised changes when it came to cost of living, they promised changes when it came to home loans, all of those things way up and through the roof. Your life has been harder under this government, not just the decisions, but the failure in their promises. That's what this election should be about, but watch everyone try to change the subject here. Watch this try to be some sort of a proxy vote against Donald Trump. Now, if that's the case, it's pretty obvious. The majority of Australians are not going to vote for what they believe to be anything Trumpy, and hence why you're going to hear it over and over again about Peter Dutton, no matter how many times he has said and proven that he is not